It had been thought that great men shaped history, that the status quo remained until a talented or exceptional person came along and shook things up. This idea has become unfashionable. Now the focus is on environmental factors that create change. Environmental disasters, the economy, disease, and a variety of other factors that lead to historical events. You can see this in Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, but I think he might have gone too far. While yes, there are environmental factors that play a role, so do exceptional individuals and leaders. Some folks really are more intelligent, and not just anybody could have come up with general relativity. That took a genius like Albert Einstein. Just as a person who is 5'3" can't play basketball, so not every person in charge of society is going to change things in the same way. We might all be the same species, but we all have our own personalities and talents. I respect the motives of that book. For so long, Westerners and Europeans had excused their conquest on the basis that the people they conquered were inferior. And they argued they were inferior based on how easily they were subjugated. And no doubt, Guns, Germs, and Steel played a role, as Diamond suggests, but keep in mind the natives also had a lot of advantages. The Europeans they were fighting were far from home in a land they didn't know. A lot of advantages they had were easily nullified. Guns used by Cortez were exceptionally slow and inaccurate. Most societies at that time still used the bow, even when they had access to the gun. It only caught on in Europe like it did, because it was effective in damaging the heavy armor of knights. In a lot of societies in Africa and Asia, the mainstay of the army were the lightly armored horse archers, so the gun really didn't offer much over the bow. Another advantage was the horse, but in the jungles of South and Central America, this wasn't such a great thing. Horses are useful insofar as they have open space to run, otherwise they're just beasts of burden, which the Aztecs and Peruvians had, called llamas. Horses did end up being an advantage due to the fact that the Aztecs were superstitious and thought they were monsters. By the time North America was being conquered, Native Americans like the Sioux and Comanche had become expert horse riders. So why did the Native Americans lose up there? I'm not suggesting the problem was the people. For the southern Native Americans, it was because the leaders allowed the Spanish so far inland without any resistance to meet with their king without knowing more about who these people were that they were dealing with. Anybody who has read The Conquest of South and Central America knows the Spanish won because they killed the leaders of the natives and threw societies into chaos. In North America, the problem was different. The reason natives in North America were taken over is because the tribes kept fighting with one another. This is the reason Africa was conquered as well. Europe needed the Berlin Conference, while Africa, after it gained its freedom, realized its mistake and Pan-Africanism became a prominent ideology. Africa only gained its freedom when the European powers started fighting again in the world wars. When you are unified, your enemy is in disarray, you succeed and they lose. And we see this in America too. Frederick Douglass said, "War between whites brought freedom to black people. What will peace bring?" Well, we know the answer. The rise of the Klan and a state of servitude little different than slavery. That's why solidarity is so often praised. We see it in unions. United we bargain, divided we beg. Malcolm X said, if white people really want to help black people, don't come over here to black communities. Speak out against racism in your own community. Teach nonviolence to your own community. Nothing is more powerful than in warfare than an encirclement or a pincher movement, and politics is warfare by another means. When I look at history, I see people making mistakes or overcoming and leaving us blueprints or traction to do something even greater. As Isaac Newton said, if I have seen farther, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. Now, I'm not here to say the environment doesn't play a role either. It's a bit like nature versus nurture. Sometimes people who look at two competing ideas forget there might not be any competition. Maybe both are factors. Another problem with the great man idea of history is, I suspect, what people really have a problem with is free will. Not everybody accepts the existence of free will, and they have a good argument too. Whether we are the product of nature or nurture, none of this allows for the individual to be self-created. However, we can't prove reality exists either, and I think like reality, we are kind of forced to accept free will's existence. For one reason, self-correction would be impossible. If somebody told you that you were wrong, you could never say, if you reject free will, that you would change your mind given enough evidence, since changing your mind implies free will. If you do change, you have to say it's due to your genetics or the environment, which doesn't really make your idea valid, does it? 2 plus 2 equals 6 because it's cold outside or because my genetics predispose me to that conclusion? We must accept that there is a third factor that leads us to what we think and, by extension, who we are. What this third factor is, I don't know, but simply saying we don't know what it is and therefore it cannot exist is bad logic. People in the past didn't have technology to study microbes and germs. Microscopes didn't exist. And in their absence, people speculated that smell was what caused disease because smell was something they could detect. Nature and nurture are two things we are conscious of, and because we don't know of a third, we conclude, therefore, there can't be any. It's like searching for your car keys under a lamppost, even if you didn't lose them there, simply because that's where the light is. And while we should never jump to conclusions or make assertions without any evidence, we also shouldn't dismiss possibilities when discoveries are made every day. In fact, science couldn't operate without the assumption that there is something in the darkness that we should investigate. We turn our telescopes to the sky not just to see planets we already know are there, but also on the suspicion that more might exist elsewhere, and maybe things in our universe we've never encountered before. Maybe a great person will come along with the right kind of intuition to know exactly where to place the telescope and look.